It was a quiet afternoon in a small cafe tucked between the busy streets of the city. The sunlight filtered gently through the windows, casting a warm glow over the wooden tables. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint sweetness of pastries on display. Behind the counter, a young woman moved with ease, her movements practiced but not robotic, as she served customers with a friendly smile. She had been working there for a few years, and the cafe had become a place of familiarity and comfort for her, a small bubble where she could connect with people. Even in brief interactions, the door jingled and a man stepped in. He was sharply dressed, with polished shoes and a crisp shirt, giving an impression of confidence, even superiority. He scanned the room with a careful eye, as though evaluating everyone present. His gaze lingered on the young woman behind the counter, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. He walked toward her station with slow, deliberate steps, exuding an air of control. "Good afternoon," he said, his tone polite, but edged with an unspoken challenge. "I hope you're capable of handling something a bit complicated. I don't like waiting long for my coffee." The woman looked at him calmly, her smile steady. "Good afternoon," she replied. "I'll do my best to make sure your coffee is perfect. What would you like today?" He leaned slightly on the counter, as if trying to assert dominance, gave her a complex order that seemed intentionally confusing. "I want a double espresso with a hint of caramel, but not too sweet. Make sure the milk is foamed exactly right, and it should be just the right temperature, not too hot, not too cold. Also, make sure the cup is warm. I'm very particular and I expect precision." She nodded, unfazed by the detailed instructions. "Not a problem," she said, her voice calm and confident. She began preparing the coffee with practiced skill. Measuring and steaming carefully, her mind focused on getting everything just right. There was no rush, no sign of stress. She had handled complicated orders before, and this was no different. While she worked, the man watched her closely, a faint smirk forming on his lips. He had come into the cafe expecting to feel superior, to test someone's patience and intelligence. He liked to see if people could match his level of knowledge or skill, and he had decided to make her his next target. His plan was to push her slightly, see if she faltered, and then relish in the satisfaction of proving his cleverness. The woman, however, seemed oblivious to his intentions. She hummed softly as she worked, moving through each step with precision. She steamed the milk, poured the espresso, and added just the right touch of caramel. When she handed the cup to him, she met his eyes and said, "Here's your double espresso with caramel, just as you requested. I hope it's perfect." He took a careful sip, his expression unreadable. Then he raised an eyebrow, leaning in slightly. "Not bad," he said, though his tone suggested he was still evaluating her. "But tell me, do you really understand the science behind steaming milk? Many people just follow a routine without knowing why it works. Do you know the chemistry involved?" She paused for a moment, considering her response. She could feel the tension in the air, the subtle test in his words. But she didn't falter. Instead, she smiled and replied, "Yes, I do. The proteins in the milk denature when heated, creating that smooth texture. It's a delicate balance between temperature and aeration. If it's done correctly, the foam will be stable and creamy. If it's overheated, it breaks down and loses texture. That's why temperature matters." There was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly masked by a small, forced smile. He hadn't expected her to answer so confidently, and it caught him off guard. She wasn't just following instructions. She understood the process behind them. For a moment, he felt a twinge of uncertainty, a crack in the armor of his carefully constructed self-assurance. The woman continued, her tone gentle but assured. "I like to know what I'm doing, not just for the sake of perfection, but because understanding the process makes every cup better. It's not just coffee. It's a small craft, and paying attention to details is part of respecting the work and the customer." He nodded slowly, still trying to maintain control. "Interesting," he said, though there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He tried to redirect the conversation, thinking that a tricky question might reestablish his dominance. "I see. And what about the origin of the coffee beans? Surely you have preferences. Do you understand the differences in flavor profiles from different regions?" She smiled, undeterred by his attempt to challenge her again. Absolutely. Coffee from Ethiopia tends to have bright, fruity notes, while beans from Colombia often have a more balanced, chocolatey flavor. The origin, the roasting, and even the storage can affect the taste. Knowing this helps me guide customers to the experience they want. He blinked, a hint of frustration hiding behind his composed facade. He had intended to impress or intimidate, but each of her answers was thoughtful and informed. She wasn't just answering. She was demonstrating insight, patience, and understanding. And she did it without arrogance, without condescension, which made his attempts to feel superior feel even weaker. The other customers in the cafe, who had been quietly observing, began to notice the interaction. Some smiled subtly at the woman's composed confidence, while others sipped their drinks, curious about the conversation unfolding in front of them. The atmosphere shifted slightly. It was no longer just a routine cafe scene, but a quiet moment of intellectual display, a subtle battle of wits. The man tried to mask his discomfort with a casual gesture, picking up his cup and pretending to admire the aroma. "I suppose you take your work seriously," he said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Not everyone does. Many people just go through the motions." She nodded, her expression calm. "I believe every task deserves attention, no matter how small it seems. Even simple actions can have meaning if you put thought into them. Understanding and care make a difference." Her response was simple, yet it carried a quiet strength. She wasn't challenging him directly, but her words reflected an intelligence and dignity that were hard to ignore. He felt the subtle shift in the power dynamic and realized that his usual methods of condescension were ineffective here. This woman didn't need to fight to prove herself. Her knowledge and composure were doing it for her. For a moment there was silence, a pause in their interaction. It was a tension-filled but not uncomfortable silence, where both were aware of the unspoken challenge. He was reassessing, realizing that she was not only competent, but confident. And that confidence carried a weight that he hadn't anticipated. Finally, he set his cup down, a small, forced smile on his face. "Well, I must say, I didn't expect such thorough answers. It's rare to see someone so dedicated to understanding their craft." She returned his smile politely. "Thank you. I believe dedication is important, and learning never stops. Every experience teaches something new." He nodded again, sensing that the initial plan he had to test and perhaps belittle her had not gone as intended. She had met his challenge calmly and intelligently, demonstrating not only skill, but also composure and poise. He left the cafe with his drink, the usual satisfaction he sought from such interactions missing. For once, he felt the subtle sting of humility, though he kept it tucked away behind a courteous farewell. The woman watched him leave, her day continuing as if nothing unusual had happened. She went back to her tasks, arranging pastries, serving customers, and maintaining the cafe's warm atmosphere. Yet there was a quiet satisfaction in her actions, a sense that she had handled the challenge with grace and intelligence. She knew that confidence was not loud or aggressive, it was calm, steady, and informed. The moment passed, but it left a small ripple in the day's flow. Other customers who had witnessed the interaction carried a subtle impression of her capability and composure. And for the woman, it was a reminder that sometimes the best way to respond to arrogance was not with anger or defensiveness, but with knowledge, patience, and quiet confidence. Her intelligence had spoken for itself, leaving a lasting impression without a single, harsh word. The cafe had settled into a steady rhythm after the brief encounter with the man who had tried to challenge her. The young woman continued her work, moving efficiently between tasks. She had returned the pastries to their trays, cleaned the counters, and attended 2 new customers with the same warm smile as always. Her mind, however, occasionally drifted back to the earlier exchange. There was something about the man that had felt different from others who tried to assert superiority. He had a confident air, but she could sense cracks beneath it, subtle insecurities that he tried to hide with arrogance. Just as she was wiping a table, the cafe door jingled again. She looked up and noticed the man returning. This time, his stride was slightly more cautious, his posture more measured. He approached the counter with a polite nod, though his eyes betrayed a mix of curiosity and a desire to regain control. "Hello again," said, his tone smoother this time. "I was thinking about our earlier conversation. You seemed quite knowledgeable. I wonder if you can handle a little challenge." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued but composed. "A challenge? I'm open to learning new things, but I'll try my best," she said, keeping her tone neutral. She could sense that this challenge was more about his need to test others than about her learning. He leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice just enough to suggest confidentiality, as if inviting her into a secret test. "All right. Imagine a situation where someone has limited resources and must solve a problem quickly. How would you prioritize tasks and make decisions efficiently without making mistakes?" Her mind immediately began to sort through the scenario. She could feel the tension, but she also felt a spark of engagement. This wasn't a threat. It was a mental puzzle, and she enjoyed solving problems. She took a moment, organizing her thoughts, then began to speak. "First, I would assess the situation clearly and identify the most urgent needs. It's important to understand which tasks, if neglected, would cause the greatest problems. Then I would consider the resources available and allocate them according to priority. Communication is key too, so everyone involved knows what is expected and what can be delayed without harm. Finally, I would review the decisions quickly to check for errors or oversights. The goal is to act decisively but thoughtfully." The man's eyes widened slightly. He had expected hesitation, uncertainty, or a flawed response. Instead, her answer was structured, clear, and practical. It revealed not only intelligence, but also experience in thinking through complex problems. He tried to maintain composure, but a flicker of doubt crossed his face. Impressive, attempting to mask his surprise. "I didn't think someone could answer so clearly. Most people panic under pressure and lose focus." She smiled politely, but there was no hint of arrogance. "It's natural to feel pressure, but it helps to take a step back and analyze the situation. Clear thinking often comes from calmness, not rushing." He leaned back slightly, pretending to take a sip of his coffee, but watching her intently. "Let's make it a bit harder," he said, his tone teasing, but calculated. "Suppose there is someone trying to distract you, to test your patience. How would you maintain focus while responding intelligently?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "I would recognize that distractions are part of life and try not to react emotionally. I would focus on what matters most, prioritize my responses, and maintain a calm demeanor. Sometimes ignoring unnecessary noise is more powerful than engaging with it." He blinked, caught off guard by the subtle wisdom in her words. He had come prepared to dominate the conversation, but each response she gave chipped away at his confidence. He realized that she wasn't just responding mechanically. She understood strategy, patience, and human behavior. His carefully constructed superiority was slipping. The other customers had noticed the ongoing exchange, and a few of them leaned slightly closer, listening without being intrusive. The young woman's composure and intellect were quietly captivating, creating an unspoken admiration in the room. It wasn't arrogance or showmanship. It was the steady, reliable power of someone who knew her mind. The man, still determined, tried another angle. "Very well. Let's consider something less abstract. Imagine you're handling a customer who complains constantly, who never seems satisfied. How would you handle them without losing professionalism or patience?" The woman nodded, understanding exactly what he was doing. She took a thoughtful breath. "I would listen carefully to understand their concerns, even if they seem trivial. It's important to acknowledge their feelings without necessarily agreeing with any incorrect points. Then, I would offer solutions that are realistic and fair, ensuring the customer feels heard and respected. At the same time, I would maintain boundaries and not allow unreasonable behavior to affect my professionalism. Empathy and clarity can diffuse tension." A few heads in the cafe tilted slightly, intrigued by her clear and sensible approach. The man frowned slightly, noticing that her response was not only correct, but also elegantly simple. He had expected confusion or hesitation, but there was none. She had taken his challenge and answered with grace and understanding. He tried to regain his confidence by introducing a quick, tricky question. All right, last one for now. Suppose someone gives you contradictory instructions, some that conflict with each other. How do you decide what to follow without making mistakes? The woman didn't flinch. She spoke steadily. I would first clarify the instructions, asking questions if necessary to understand the intention behind them. If contradictions remain, I would prioritize based on urgency, impact, and fairness. Communication is essential here, so the person giving the instructions understands the choices I'm making and why. Transparency and thoughtfulness prevent mistakes and build trust. The man sat back, a little taken aback. He had expected hesitation, but her answer was confident, detailed, and rational. Each response she gave reinforced the fact that she was not easily shaken and could handle challenges intelligently. He realized that she had not only met his challenges but had subtly shown him how to approach problems more wisely. The cafe had become a quiet stage. With the young woman as the focal point, her calmness and intellect contrasted sharply with the man's initial air of superiority. Customers were now glancing at her with subtle smiles, appreciating the rare moment of thoughtful interaction. They weren't just witnessing a conversation. They were seeing a demonstration of poise, clarity, and human intelligence in action. The man, sensing the shift, tried to wrap up the conversation. Well, you've exceeded my expectations, he admitted, his tone a mix of respect and reluctant humility. It's rare to meet someone who can think clearly under pressure and explain it so well. Hey! She returned his nod and smile. Thank you. I believe everyone can develop clarity if they pay attention and practice patience. Knowledge and understanding grow when we stay calm and focused, even in challenging situations. There was a pause, a moment of mutual recognition. He had come intending to test and perhaps embarrass her, but instead, he had found himself humbled by her quiet intelligence. She had not mocked him or been aggressive. She had simply been herself, knowledgeable, calm, and insightful. The result was clear. His attempts to assert dominance had been neutralized without confrontation. As he left the cafe, there was a subtle change in his demeanor. He was polite, but he carried with him a sense of reflection, perhaps even self-awareness. For the young woman, the encounter was already becoming a lesson in human nature and the value of composure. She returned to her routine, serving customers, making drinks, and arranging pastries. Her mind occasionally replaying the conversation as a quiet smile touched her lips. The cafe returned to its rhythm, the sunlight still warming the room and the aroma of coffee blending with the quiet chatter of patrons. But the energy in the space had shifted slightly. The young woman had faced an intellectual test, not for grades or recognition, but in the most ordinary of settings. And she had passed not by showing off, but by remaining calm, thoughtful, and confident. It was a quiet victory, one that left a lasting impression on everyone present, and especially on her, a reminder that intelligence, patience, and grace often speak louder than arrogance or bluster. The next day, the young woman arrived at the cafe early, as she usually did. The morning light was soft, painting golden streaks across the tables. She enjoyed these quiet moments before the rush, when she could set things in order, arrange the pastries neatly, and make sure the cafe felt welcoming. The memory of the previous day lingered in her mind. The man who had come in and attempted to challenge her had left a lasting impression, not because he had embarrassed her, but because his arrogance had tested her patience and composure in a way she hadn't encountered often. She moved around with her usual rhythm, checking the coffee machines, wiping the counters, and making sure everything was ready. As she arranged the cups, the door chimed. She looked up and saw the man from yesterday standing there again. His posture was different this time. There was less arrogance, more caution. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes entirely. He approached the counter, and she greeted him warmly, as always. "Good morning," she said. "What can I get for you today?" He leaned slightly on the counter, studying her. "Morning. I was thinking about our conversation yesterday. I'd like to see how you handle something a little more challenging." She tilted her head slightly, curious but calm. "All right. I'm listening." He'd obviously prepared himself. "Let's say there's a problem at work where someone is spreading misinformation to gain an advantage. How would you handle it without escalating the situation?" She took a deep breath, considering her response. Her mind mapped out the scenario carefully. First, I would verify the information myself. It's important not to react based on assumptions. Then, I would address the issue calmly and factually, providing correct information without attacking anyone personally. I would focus on resolving the problem rather than winning an argument. Sometimes explaining the truth patiently works better than confrontation. The key is to communicate clearly and maintain professionalism. He raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed, but not willing to show it outright. Interesting. Most people would react emotionally, especially if they felt threatened. She nodded, her expression steady. Emotions can cloud judgment. Staying calm allows for better decisions and often diffuses tension. People notice clarity and composure more than they notice anger or frustration. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, realizing that she wasn't just intelligent but thoughtful. She wasn't responding to simply prove herself. She was demonstrating insight and strategy. There was a quiet power in her calm approach, strength that didn't need to be loud or aggressive. He leaned closer, as if to reassert himself. Let's try another. Suppose you're in a meeting and someone openly challenges your ideas. They speak confidently, trying to undermine your credibility. What would you do? She considered this for a moment. I would listen carefully, making sure I understand their points. Then I would respond with facts and reasoning, calmly and respectfully. I wouldn't attack them personally. If necessary, I would ask questions that help clarify their assumptions. The goal isn't to win an argument, but to communicate effectively and maintain integrity. Sometimes demonstrating knowledge quietly is more powerful than arguing loudly. The man's hand tapped lightly on the counter. He was trying to maintain control, but he could feel that she was steadily regaining it. Every response she gave was structured, thoughtful, and calm. It was not just intelligence, it was emotional strength and awareness. He had underestimated the depth of her mind. Customers in the cafe began to notice the conversation. Drawn by the subtle tension and the woman's composed responses, some exchanged glances, impressed by her clarity and wisdom. There was something captivating in watching someone handle challenge and pressure with such calm authority. It wasn't just about intelligence. It was about character. The man tried a different approach, attempting to challenge her socially. All right, imagine someone spreads a rumor about you, trying to damage your reputation. How would you respond without losing face? She smiled faintly, meeting his gaze. I would assess the situation first, understanding what is being said and why. Then I would choose whether it needs addressing or can be ignored. If it requires a response, I would clarify the facts calmly and politely, without attacking the person spreading the rumor. Maintaining dignity and truth is more important than retaliating. People notice composure and honesty, not loud reactions. He paused, genuinely surprised. Her answers weren't rehearsed or defensive. They were insightful, measured, and practical. He realized that his attempts to dominate, to humiliate, or to impress were ineffective against her calm intelligence. She was not only matching him, she was subtly showing him a more thoughtful way to navigate challenges. The conversation continued, with him offering hypothetical scenarios designed to test her patience and reasoning. Each time, she responded with a balance of clarity, empathy, and logic. She didn't belittle him, she didn't boast, and she didn't show irritation. Instead, she demonstrated that intelligence is most powerful when combined with composure and understanding. As the morning passed, more customers observed the interaction, quietly admiring her approach. She had transformed what could have been a tense or confrontational situation into a demonstration of grace under pressure. The man, once confident and self-assured, now seemed cautious and reflective. Aware that his usual tactics had failed, finally he leaned back. His expression a mixture of respect and reluctant acknowledgement. I must admit, he said, his voice softer than before. I didn't expect someone to respond so thoughtfully to every challenge. It's rare to see this combination of intelligence and calmness. She nodded politely. Thank you. I believe clarity and patience go a long way, whether in small tasks or larger challenges. Understanding and staying calm often prevent problems from escalating. The man set down his cup, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. There was a humility in his posture, subtle but present. He had come seeking to dominate or humiliate, yet he left with an appreciation for her approach. For the young woman, the encounter reinforced her own belief in the power of calm intelligence. She returned to her work, serving other customers and preparing drinks, her mind quietly reflecting on the lessons of the morning as she moved through the cafe. The warmth of the sunlight seemed brighter, and the aroma of coffee more comforting. She knew that intelligence is not just about knowledge. It's about applying it thoughtfully, with patience and composure. She had faced a challenge, not in a classroom or office, but in the everyday setting of a cafe, and she had emerged not through force, but through calm understanding and steady reasoning. The day continued. Each customer interaction, a reminder that human connection and understanding often reveal strength more effectively than arguments or dominance. The man's visit had been a test, but it had also been an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate that intelligence paired with grace leaves a lasting impression. And as the young woman went about her work, she felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had handled it with poise, proving that true strength often lies in composure, wisdom, and the gentle but firm assertion of one's mind. The cafe was busier than usual that afternoon. The morning rush, having given way to a steady stream of customers enjoying their coffee and quiet conversations, the young woman moved through the space with the same calm efficiency as always, her smile warm but focused as she served drinks and prepared orders. Despite the routine, her mind still held a small corner for reflection on the man who had challenged her intellect earlier. She couldn't help but be curious about what might come next, especially now that he seemed to carry a sense of humility she had not seen before. The bell above the door jingled again. She looked up. There he was, stepping into the cafe with a more careful gait. His eyes scanned the room, resting on her with an expression that was no longer confident in the same way as before. He approached the counter slowly, his tone polite but slightly hesitant. "Hello," he said, placing a hand on the counter. "I hope you don't mind if I try one more scenario. I find our previous conversations enlightening." She nodded, intrigued but composed. "Of course," she replied. "I'm listening." He leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice as though creating a private bubble around their conversation. "Let's say there is a person who consistently criticizes you in a subtle way, trying to make you feel inadequate. How would you respond to maintain your confidence and not let them gain power over you?" She paused for a moment, thinking carefully. "I would start by recognizing that their behavior is more about them than me. Understanding that helps prevent personal offense. Then I would respond calmly if necessary, with facts or clarity, without letting emotion take over. Remaining composed and confident, even in the face of subtle criticism, often discourages such behavior more effectively than confrontation." He raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed, but attempting to maintain control. "Interesting. And if someone tried to publicly embarrass you, in front of colleagues or peers, what would you do?" She smiled faintly. "I would remain calm, not react emotionally, and address the situation with clarity if it needs correction. Often responding with poise rather than defensiveness shows strength and prevents further embarrassment. People notice calmness and intelligence more than loud reactions or aggression." Her words hung in the air, carrying a quiet but undeniable authority. The man leaned back slightly, realizing that his usual tactics of intimidation or condescension were ineffective here. He had attempted to test her confidence, but each response she gave reinforced her composure, intellect, and insight. It was not just knowledge. It was the understanding of human behavior, strategy, and subtlety that set her apart. The cafe customers, already familiar with the earlier interactions, observed quietly, sensing the tension and the exchange of wits. There was an unspoken admiration in the room for the young woman, whose calm demeanor and thoughtful responses contrasted sharply with the man's initially forceful approach. She had managed to turn the challenge into a demonstration of grace and intelligence. He had tried another approach, hoping to regain a sense of dominance. Imagine someone spreads false information about your work, trying to undermine your credibility. How would you respond without escalating the issue? She spoke calmly, her voice clear and steady. I would assess the situation carefully, understanding the facts and identifying what is true and what is not. Then, I would respond factually and politely, clarifying misunderstandings without attacking anyone personally. Maintaining professionalism and integrity is more important than reacting to provocation. People are more likely to trust someone who responds with clarity and composure. He leaned on the counter, running a hand through his hair. He realized he was increasingly aware of the difference between their approaches. He had assumed that his confidence and experience in challenging others would give him an edge. But here was someone who not only met him intellectually, but surpassed him in subtlety and insight. Her responses were calm, precise, and disarming in their effectiveness. The young woman continued, adding, "Sometimes it's not about winning or proving someone wrong. It's about maintaining your values and integrity. Remaining composed in difficult situations often speaks louder than words of retaliation." He looked at her, a faint acknowledgement of respect in his eyes. There was no longer a desire to belittle or dominate. Instead, there was curiosity, even admiration. He began to understand that intelligence and composure could humiliate arrogance without a single harsh word being spoken. For a few moments, silence fell between them. The cafe carried on around them, the chatter of other customers, the clinking of cups, and the soft hum of conversation creating a warm backdrop. In that quiet pause, the man reflected on his own approach, realizing that he had underestimated her. She had handled every challenge calmly and intelligently, without aggression, without showing irritation, and without trying to assert superiority. Her method was indirect, yet powerful, turning his own attempts to control the interaction into a subtle lesson in humility. He attempted a final challenge, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "All right, last one," he said cautiously. "Suppose someone attempts to provoke you into making a mistake in a professional setting. What is the best way to respond?" Her expression remained calm and steady. "I would recognize the provocation and focus on the task at hand. Emotional reactions rarely solve problems. I would take a step back, analyze the situation, and respond thoughtfully if necessary. Remaining composed and clear-minded ensures that mistakes are minimized and credibility is maintained. It also demonstrates that provocation cannot easily control or influence your actions." The man's shoulders relaxed slightly, a smile touching his lips, though tinged with humility. He realized he had been outmatched, not in knowledge, but in composure, insight, and practical intelligence. Her intelligence was not flashy or boastful. It was quiet, effective, and human. She had humiliated him not through confrontation, but by simply being herself calm, knowledgeable, and graceful. He set his cup down, a gesture of surrender more than politeness. "You've shown me something I didn't expect," he admitted quietly. "It's rare to encounter someone who responds with intelligence and calmness without any hint of arrogance." "I see now that my approach was flawed," the young woman nodded, maintaining her polite smile. "Thank you. I believe that staying calm, thoughtful, and true to one's values is often more effective than trying to dominate others. Understanding and composure can turn even challenging situations into opportunities for learning." As he left the cafe, the atmosphere seemed lighter. The customers who had been observing the exchange carried subtle smiles, some quietly reflecting on the display of human intelligence and grace. The young woman returned to her work, her mind calm, her movements fluid, and her smile warm. She continued serving drinks, attending to orders, and arranging pastries. But a quiet sense of satisfaction lingered within her. The encounter had been more than a test of knowledge. It had been a demonstration of human intelligence, patience, and grace under subtle pressure. She had faced a challenge designed to provoke, belittle, and test. Yet she had emerged with dignity intact, her intelligence shining through without a hint of aggression. The cafe returned to its usual rhythm, but the impression of the exchange remained, both for the man who had left with newfound humility and for the young woman who had once again proven the power of composure, clarity, and quiet strength. Through the rest of the afternoon, As the sun cast a gentle glow over the tables and the scent of coffee filled the air, she moved among the customers with the same warmth and poise. Each interaction, whether with regular patrons or new faces, carried the subtle confidence of someone who understood that true intelligence was not just in knowing, but in responding thoughtfully, staying calm, and maintaining one's integrity. And in that she had triumphed without raising her voice, proving that sometimes the most powerful way to humiliate arrogance is simply to be wise, patient, and human. The next morning, the cafe opened as usual. The sunlight spilling softly across the tables and highlighting the polished wooden surfaces. The young woman arrived early, taking a moment to enjoy the quiet before the customers arrived. There was a rhythm to her mornings, arranging pastries, checking the machines, and making sure everything was in order. Today, though, the air felt a little different. The events of the past few days lingered in her mind, a reminder of how subtle human interactions could reveal character and strength. She began her work, moving smoothly between tasks, serving early customers with a warm smile. As she prepared drinks and arranged the tables, she noticed the man from the previous days standing outside, watching the cafe through the window. When he saw her looking, he smiled and entered, this time without the air of challenge he had carried before. His steps were more measured, and his posture reflected reflection rather than confidence seeking to impress. "Good morning," he said, his tone more relaxed than before. "I thought I would come by and see how you are today." She returned the greeting with her usual warmth. "Good morning. Please, take your time. What would you like today?" He hesitated for a moment before responding, clearly considering his words. "I don't need anything complicated today. I just wanted to thank you for the conversations we had. They were enlightening. I've realized that I approached things in the wrong way, trying to assert myself when I should have been listening and learning." She nodded politely, her expression calm and friendly. "I'm glad to hear that. Reflection and understanding are important. Every interaction can teach us something if we pay attention." He took a seat at a nearby table, sipping a simple cup of coffee. For a while, there was a comfortable silence, broken only by the gentle sounds of the cafe, the clinking of cups, the hum of conversation, and the aroma of coffee filling the air. She continued her work, but she noticed him glancing occasionally, as though he were observing not just the cafe, but how she interacted with everything around her. After a few moments, he spoke again. "I've been thinking about how I treated others in the past. I often tried to appear clever or superior, and it made interactions tense. Seeing how you handle challenges has made me realize the value of calmness and intelligence, not in showing off, but in understanding." She paused for a moment, considering her response. It's easy to forget that our actions affect others. Taking the time to listen, think carefully, and respond thoughtfully makes a difference. It's not about proving yourself to others, but about maintaining integrity and clarity in what you do. He nodded, the weight of understanding in his eyes. "I see that now. Your patience and intelligence showed me that trying to dominate or belittle only highlights my own weaknesses. There's a quiet strength in what you do that I didn't appreciate before." The young woman smiled gently. "Strength isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it's in being consistent, composed, and thoughtful. People notice it, even if it isn't immediately obvious. It leaves a lasting impression because it's genuine." Throughout the morning, the man stayed at his table, occasionally watching her serve other customers. He observed the ease with which she managed the cafe, the warmth in her interactions, and the subtle way she maintained order and attention to detail. There was a quiet authority in her actions, a competence that came from knowledge and experience. And it was not imposed on anyone, it simply existed. Other customers continued their routines, some observing the exchange between the two, sensing a shift in energy. The man was no longer trying to challenge her. He was learning from her, witnessing firsthand the difference between arrogance and composure, between attempts to dominate and genuine understanding. Her intelligence had a humbling effect, without a word of insult or confrontation. At one point, a young man at a nearby table accidentally spilled his coffee, looking embarrassed. The woman quickly approached, helping him clean up with a calm and reassuring presence. She handled the situation efficiently, maintaining the comfort of the cafe and diffusing any tension. The man watched this, quiet realization settling in. True intelligence is not just about answering questions or solving hypothetical problems. It is also about managing real human situations with empathy, patience, and thoughtfulness. After the incident, he spoke again, his voice soft but sincere. "You've shown me something important. Intelligence isn't just about knowledge or skill. It's about how you handle people, how you maintain your composure, and how you communicate." "I underestimated that before." She nodded, her tone gentle. "It's easy to underestimate. But experience, patience, and reflection teach us the value of composure. Knowing yourself and understanding others creates a balance that allows intelligence to be applied wisely." As the morning turned to afternoon, the cafe continued its rhythm, the young woman at the center. Moving gracefully from task to task, the man eventually stood to leave, a quiet sense of respect in his demeanor. "Thank you," he said simply, "for your patience, your wisdom, and for showing me a better way to approach people and challenges." She smiled warmly. "Thank you for listening and reflecting. That's often the hardest part." He left the cafe, the bell above the door jingling softly. She watched him go, a sense of calm satisfaction within her. The encounter had concluded, but the impact lingered for both of them. He had come intending to test, challenge, or belittle, yet he left having learned humility, reflection, and the subtle power of composure. She had faced the challenge not with aggression or arrogance, but with quiet intelligence and patience, proving that true power often speaks in actions and presence rather than words. The cafe returned fully to its usual flow, customers chatting, sipping their drinks, and enjoying the atmosphere. The young woman continued her work, aware of the lessons learned and the quiet triumph of handling a delicate situation with grace. She moved among the tables, her smile steady, her actions thoughtful, and her mind calm. Throughout the day, she reflected on the encounters of the past days. Intelligence, she realized, was not only in knowledge, but in application, patience, and empathy. The ability to remain composed in the face of challenge, to respond thoughtfully, to understand human behavior created a power that could not be shaken by arrogance or attempts at humiliation. It was a reminder that quiet strength often leaves the deepest impact. By the time evening arrived, the sunlight had softened into a warm glow, casting long shadows across the cafe. The young woman finished her tasks, tidying the space and preparing for the next day. She felt a sense of fulfillment, not just from a job well done, but from the knowledge that she had faced challenges with grace and integrity. She had humiliated no one, yet arrogance had been humbled. Not through confrontation, but through intelligence, composure, and quiet confidence. As the cafe doors closed and the evening settled in, she paused for a moment by the counter, reflecting on the lessons of the week. Life often presented unexpected tests, not in exams or competitions, but in ordinary encounters. How one responded, how one maintained patience. Understanding and clarity revealed character more than any argument or display of superiority ever could. And in that truth, she found strength, satisfaction, and the quiet joy of knowing that integrity and intelligence were powerful beyond measure.